Bruno? Who is Bruno?
My first band was called The Rejects. It was at the time of when punk was first starting to stir in London.
Bruno was just one of the regular faces that would always pop up, pogoing.
He was mad. He was absolutely mad.
He sent this record out into the world, and a lot of people listen to them.
He knows what his truth is, and he sticks to it.
Let me see how long it's going to take for the establishment to destabilise the punk movement. It took about 6 months, and at the end of that 6 months, I changed the name of my band from The Rejects to The Homosexuals to keep the major labels away from us.
It was absolutely genius to call them the Homosexuals, because none of them were, which we always thought was quite a sort of a true punk thing to do.
And have you known people who were homeless and then gotten off the street?
Yes. It's, well, Bruno is one of those.
Why do I enjoy sleeping in the cupboard so much? Well, if you knew what I'd been through in the last few years, then you'd most probably want to move into the cupboard with me.
We knew to survive, we had to work within the system. I think he always refused to work within the system. And that's, in a way, why this film is being made of him, because he stuck his neck out and did what he wanted to do.
Yo, it's Ethan McKinley's Questionable. Hit the music. Ba, 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 ba. Good evening, everybody. This is Ethan McKinley, and of course, this is Questionable. I am joined by a legendary icon of the punk scene, the amazing Bruno Wizard, who is the subject of a documentary about his life, The Heart of Bruno Wizard, both on Netflix and also iTunes. So we're going to come to how you can watch that later in the show. Bruno, my darling man, where are you? There you are. Hello, hello. Okay, I can see you now.
You can see me. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Welcome to the show. I've been very excited to actually speak to you. When I saw the documentary way back when, it just didn't pan out that way that we could do the show at that point, because I didn't know how to put a show together on my own. I've since taught myself that, and in the year and a half that we've last saw each other, but now...
You're the king of DIY. You know?
I am.
Internet's godfather of DIY punk, which is a complete misnomer, but we can fool around and put pay to the DIY myth, yeah? Because DIY, when I first started doing it, was just an answer to my situation. It wasn't because I wanted to create an alternative like the music industry or the film industry that would, run on, I'd create something that would bring me to the attention of people, higher up, in terms of production and money and stuff like that. Like I often say, if I don't breathe, I die. If I don't create, I suffocate. I've always been blessed with having loads and loads of ideas, but in England, if you're not prepared to siphon those between very narrow parameters created by the establishment who control the means of production, distribution and the media, and have done since the 60s. But now we've got the internet and people like yourself that previously would have been like scuffing about wherever you've been brought up with loads of creative ideas. But the idea of having your own radio or TV show would have been like, no, it's only Terry Wogan that gets those. Or, do you know what I mean? It's and, the establishment set the parameters for what is and isn't an artist. And if you're not prepared to squeeze yourself through into that sausage machine of their making, then you're an outsider and you're playing to two men and a dog in Belgium and it's a dog that's clapping. And you say, well, that's a really, really cool, cool dog. So I'm here to proclaim the death of DIY. What I do now is do it myself, like you. This is the birth on your radio show of DIM, dim. We shine brightly to those that are not conscious. We're like a far off star in the crystal clear night sky. But it's us doing it ourselves. Yeah? Dim. This is the birth of Dim. So.
Well, before we started the show, we talked about your time at school when you had the careers officer come in. You always seem to have, I guess, this kind of slightly left of centre outlook on life. Even then, as a child, you kind of saw the kind of behind the curtain of Oz, if you will, and saw the wizard behind it. What was there any kind of trigger in your young life that made you see things differently?
Well, there were the kind of things that you're describing that you garner from, who you think I am as a person and the way I operate, which is fairly clear. I grew up on a council estate in the north of England. I was born in 1950, so that was post-war. And rationing from the war, I think it just ended about a year before I was born. Sure. So without knowing, I was born into this sort of post-war situation where in America, there was the birth of the teenager and the Americans being forever optimistic and whatever, even if they're living on borrowed time by getting into credit, getting into debt. These people, there was the birth of the teenage revolution, and it was the first time that had, ever been seen. What was the question again?
Just the way you perceive life.
I'm only teasing. There was one singular event, right? I used to sit and listen to the stars singing all night. So I brought up on this council estate, which is never out of the town that I grew up in, Sunderland. People have been taught, not to expect anything from life. Obviously not everybody, but the general kind of economic gloom, source of happiness for the people where I grew up, like everywhere else, was money, money to buy a house, money to have a car, money. I mean, I can remember when the first car came to our street. Streets were for playing football on and cricket. And if a car came down the road, the car would wait. We wouldn't all scurry away, like somebody that had been caught at it. We would, the car would have to wait for a minute or so till somebody scored a goal or whatever, then we'd get off the road. So it really was those kind of times. Now, as children, we don't articulate the world to ourselves the same way we do as adults. We don't use logic and reason, but we're very sensitive. We're like little artists, we're open. Everything's open, and all of these tsunami of senses flooding. Now, every night I used to sit and listen to the stars sing, right, and watching them dance. And an uncle of mine, right, who'd been in the war, he used to come and have breakfast with us every Sunday. It's very caring community, or, bring uncles and aunties and cousins into it. So he used to come up, and my mum said to me one day, don't mention anything to do with religion because Uncle Jack has got religious mania. Right? Now, my Uncle Jack was the most interesting person I'd ever met in my life. I already used to sit and listen to the stars singing, and not really knowing that not everybody can hear the stars sing. I'm just a child. And I remember one day, Sunday morning at breakfast, Uncle Jack, he'd walked about 3 miles to get there, and he's sitting down, and he had such a beautiful vibe about him. And I said, Uncle Jack? And my mum kind of looked, and everybody in the family looked like, what's he going to say? It was like a Mrs. Brown type moment, what's he going to say? I said, oh, where have you been before you came here? Knowing full well that he'd been to church. And, and he said, I went to the local church to give thanks and glory to whoever, whatever created this universe. Do you know that when you look at the stars in the night sky, I was about 6 or 7 when he told me this, right? And remember, I've just woken up from listening to the stars sing all night. And he said, do you know those stars are not where you see them? What? And he explained to me about the sun being reflected, light being reflected of objects, traveling at 186,000 miles per second to reach my eye. So I was already fascinated with the stars and the way they sang and danced. Now here's my uncle telling me, in real terms, feeding into that wild curiosity and intuition and energy and creativity that I had. He'd basically taken the top of my head off like Monty Python and just poured in all this what would now rank as a lecture in quantum physics and quantum mechanics, and discovering the anti-electron and all these wonderful things I was feeling as a child anyway. And so when Uncle Jack told me, he said, when you look at those stars, you're seeing where they were millions of years ago, because the light from those stars has traveled for millions of years to reach you. They're not there anymore. And I was and that really, really impressed me. That was the single most impressive thing in my life because it was the first time an adult had been able to talk to me as a child with a common language, and that common language was the miracle of the universe. Yeah? You know, but without being religious about it, you know, they say if you want to see the hand of God at work, look to nature. Well, small g, inverted commas, because the religious teachers that taught me were the biggest bunch of, I'm not going to say the name on air, but let's just say the Catholic Church is only now dealing with these things 40 or 50 years later. Yeah? So for my uncle, who, you know, had some kind of authority in the hierarchy of family, which is very strong where I grew up, yeah, for him to be saying it and there's such glee, his eyes were fucking bouncing and burning in his head as he was telling me, and he just told me loads and loads of interesting things. So I was able to tie up for the first time through my Uncle Jack, talking to me almost as a mini quantum physicist. And so, that really kept me going, like during the years when I realized that the so-called education that I was getting by nuns and Irish Christian brothers was not education. It was social conditioning.
Yeah.
Well, it was turned me into a useful socio-economic unit that would fit in with their, whatever political economic plan they had. Exactly, for the next manifesto that they could fool people with. So I think if I was going to name anything, that will be it, because that was when I was still a child, but I was being talked to by an adult in a way that just directly appealed to me and everything that I was experiencing by listening to the stars sing and watching them dance all night.
What were the options for a young man growing up in Sunderland? When you left school, I mean, you went obviously to become a musician. What were the options for someone growing up in that era in Sunderland? Was it just factories, or was that it?
It was Sunderland is a port. It's on the northeast coast, you know, near part of this triumvirate of like Middlesbrough and Newcastle. You know, three rivers. The shipbuilding and mining industry and steelworks, they were the staple diet. Yeah, but they were about to become sort of like dinosaurs, and you know, when they all closed down, then half the town was left with like no jobs. You know, there was all the other things that depended on shipbuilding, the prosperity of shipbuilding, coal mining especially, and so I was actually sort of, the estate I was born into was a new estate that after the Second World War, the government decided to build all these kind of like new estates, knock down all the old buildings. So it was about 3 miles out from the centre of town. But no, the only options were that with the dreaded 11 plus, if you passed your 11 plus, you were supposed to be grateful that you went to this Catholic grammar school where the brothers really were just like deviants, you know. They were just using their authority to go into all kinds of like sexual exploits, you know, with teenage boys, you know, and explaining that if we had sexual feelings, it was the devil inside of us. You know?
How do they explain their feelings and their kind of like trespasses against the children, if you will?
Well, I mean, they're having to come up with explanations now, aren't they? And the way they do it is by...
Well, they just move the priest to a different parish or school, don't they? That's what was happening anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly what was happening with my son. I mean, without slandering anybody now, he's most probably long dead, but the headmaster of my school at the time, who was an Irish Christian brother, 2 years after I left, he was made head of all the Irish Christian brothers' schools in the United Kingdom. So that meant, you know, if anybody made a complaint about one of the brothers, he would just be moved to a different school. It was exactly the same dynamic. I read somewhere recently that Archbishop Ratzinger, who became the only pope in the last 600 years to retire, I seem to remember reading somewhere that for 30 years he was head of the like paedophile unit. Like, you know, if there was any complaints about a priest, then he was the one that decided. And they never turned them over to the police. You know, they just, like say, moved them to a different parish or a different school. But, you know, I can't put my hand on my heart and say I was actually sexually molested by these guys. But I knew it was going on. Yeah. You know? And so I deliberately kind of like tried to make myself small so I wouldn't become the object of affection of, you know, one of these brothers, because basically they've got 5 years to hunt you down. And it's significant that within 6 months of leaving school, my whole immune system died. I just collapsed, you know. I was in a hospital for 6 months. I was in a death ward for a month. The first night the priest came in and gave me the last sacraments, you know.
What was wrong with you? What was wrong with you? What were the symptoms?
I had tuberculosis, double pneumonia, and pleurisy. Yeah, and this was in the 60s, you know, when they didn't know too much about it. And but you know, as I was getting more and more ill, then my mother was saying to me, "You can't go out like that. You look terrible." Now, my mother's generation, TB to them was like what cancer is to our generation. You know, so it's almost something shameful. You know, oh, it's only really poor people that get TB because of bad conditions. And you know, people they invented like little terms for it. You know, because it was very close to a coal mining village, and they used to call it galloping consumption. You know, it's fucking called TB. You know, but they call it, you know, galloping consumption, you know, and they talk about it behind their hands. You know, as I was being given the last sacraments by the priest, my spirit was up above the bed watching this. Yeah, and you know, my mother lost half of her family to TB. That's one of the reasons why, you know, working class people used to have such big families. It's the same as in some third world countries, you know, because you know, if you have 10 kids, you might lose 6 of them. Yeah, it really was like that kind of atmosphere. But I mean, I only discovered certain things about the way people related to me there in Sunderland after I'd left, and I was able to see other things in the world. I don't want this to give the impression that I'm down on Sunderland. It's a beautiful place. There's some lovely people there, but you know, it was one of the most economically depressed areas in the country. So it was fertile ground for governments whenever they wanted to sacrifice young boys in the war effort. They would just go to these places and say, "Hey, look, you're going to court next week, you know, for something. You can the magistrate's going to offer you either join the army or go to prison." So loads of kids were like, "Well, go to the army, you know, go to the army." But yeah, it was. There's been some like very, very talented people in Sunderland, but Sunderland's just like the microcosm for how governments keep people in economic poverty to distract them from what's really, really going on in the world. It's the same people that created empire through divide and conquer, divide and rule. But long before the British government went, or the British as a nation went around the world oppressing people of colour, they were doing it to their own people and the Irish for 1,000 years through the class system and the feudal system. And then suddenly we hit the swinging 60s, and it seemed that my generation had an empathy with the civil rights movement in North America, to rioting and barricading in the Sorbonne and street fighting in Paris and Prague and all around the world, you know.
Did that manifest itself, that kind of culture shock, did that manifest in Sunderland too? Or did you have to go to London to really kind of soak up that kind of like element of society? Because you came to London in the late 60s, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I had another kind of like Damascene moment when I was 11, you know, after Uncle Jack kind of like articulating to me what was happening with the outer cosmos and satisfying that. Well, you know, alchemists would say that the macrocosm is a mirror image of everything in the microcosm. So if you find something in the macrocosm that appeals to you, then look inward, yeah? Don't just take that information and run away and make money, you know, from less fortunate souls. Look at that and go, wow, that's incredible. Which part of me finds that incredible? And let's work on that and the insight. So there's a balance between microcosm and macrocosm. But when I was 11, when I first passed the 11 plus, the general story was, oh, wow, you're so lucky to be able to go to that grammar school. Yeah. Right? When really it was fucking hellhole and, you know, like staying one step ahead of these predatory Irish Christian brothers, you know. So when I was 11, because something else happened to me that was very important when I was about 5 or 6, before I'd even learned the alphabet. My space mother, who I thought was orchestrating this wonderful song and dance routine in the stars every night, yeah, she said to me one night, if you're a good boy while you're on this planet, one day I will come and take you home to the stars. Because I used to have regular dreams about being in space. Now, the first Sputnik didn't go up until 1957. So there'd never been pictures of the Earth from space before then, right? But I used to have like really, really lucid dreams where, one, I was just floating around in a spacesuit, like almost at a spacewalk. And as I looked back on the Earth, the child in me was sensing, oh, I'm supposed to be there. Yeah,
you're Major Tom. David Bowie sang about you.
Exactly. But there was also the feeling of, wow, I'm in space. But my childlike mind didn't realize that if I told people about this, that they would either think I was crazy or I'd be a mirror to their own inadequacy or their own lack of curiosity. Whatever, it wasn't the best thing for communication with, most of the people that I knew in Sunderland. There were one or two people that I used to talk to things about. But anyway, my space mother said to me, about the whole thing about being a good boy and doing what I need to do, right? And she said, meanwhile, I'm going to send my friends to look after you. They're called words. So before I'd even learned the alphabet, I was aware of these characters called words, that would appear in my imagination or in my soul or in my spirit, and they'd be my friends. So I had that from being a child. That was always my kind of, not even escape. It was just like the really magical moments that were much more magical than anything else. So in direct answer to your question, when I was 11 and I passed my 11 plus, everybody on my working class estate was saying, oh, wow, God, you're so intelligent to get in there and you'll be able to go to university. Because remember, it's the 60s, early 61. Yeah. Anyway, I already had this feeling of what was going on at the school, that there was something wrong. And when we were doing history or maths or whatever, when the teachers were explaining to me, they seemed to be using words in a different way than I'd experienced, in this kind of pure relationship with my space mother. So I was like, well, there's something wrong here, because I loved reading. I can still remember.
Can you clarify and define what the space mother is? Is this just your inner voice?
Yeah, exactly. Well, whatever. I mean, I didn't feel the need at this time, but at my age, with the experience that I've got, it could be, it could be just my intuition. That's still quite inner voice that's always guided me, which I've learned to never disregard, because, the small, quiet voice inside seems to say no to the immediate pleasures of sex and drugs and rock and roll. But the loud voices of sex and drugs and rock and roll say, over here, baby, come and get it. It's the 60s. If you can be with the one you love, honey, love the one you with. If it feels good, do it. Yeah, that's great when you're first doing it, like your first fix of heroin or whatever. You think, oh, there's nothing better than this in the whole world. But then you find out you've been tricked. Now, the only reason I took drugs, apart from like when I first came to London, there was nobody of my generation that could actually warn us and articulate what was really happening. Nobody would tell us the difference between LSD and transcendental meditation, or opium and the feeling that you get when you've done a really good workout and your brain is naturally producing endorphins. There was nobody to explain any of that. So, and coming on the back of like all the religious kind of oppression I felt at school and the confusion of being a teenager, being told that the strongest energy that I felt at that time was actually from a devil. Sure. And having been told by nuns at 5 years of age, if I died with a mortal sin on my soul, I would go straight to hell, where I would burn forever and ever and ever. And that's not the real pain of hell. The real pain of hell is your soul being separated from God. What the fuck? What's that all about? So, I got bussed when I was 30, 31. I got bussed for heroin. I was in police custody. And
what year was this? Did you come to London quite late? How old were you when you came to London?
Well, I was born in 1950, so 1960 I was 10, 1970 I was 20, 90,
Okay, so you came when you were like 17 or 18 to London.
Yeah, after I got out of hospital and I was recovering from the TB, I still had to, for the next 18 months, I still had to take these really powerful chemicals to stop it from coming back. Remember, it was the 60s. They weren't as sophisticated with their information about TB. And so I couldn't wait till I was 18 to get my passport and get out of there. So, for about a year, I was traveling, like hitchhiking around Europe, coming to London, doing different things. Don't ask me how I survived. It's a long, long story. That's a whole story in itself, yeah. But yes, officially, I came to London as soon as I was old enough to get a passport. That was in 1968, yeah.
And you tried drugs at that point and things?
Well, remember, I'd had a major operation on my lung that, like 85 stitches in my chest and, sort of like really, really like serious operation. If I hadn't had that operation, I would have been dead before I was 30. So my first introduction to drugs, apart from looking in the kitchen cupboard and seeing my dad's Valium, because he was a victim of the Second World War, right? His Valium and Librium, and then also my mother's as well on the other side of the cupboard. When I was little and everybody had gone to sleep, I'd be, looking up at the stars, but then I'd go downstairs and do some reading and kind of like walk around the house and pretend it was mine. I could do whatever I want. It was like a kind of metaphor for the body being the home of the spirit, And I remember like looking at these pills in the cupboard in the kitchen and thinking, my dad's not been home from the war long. He's like, his nerves are very, very bad. He's been told he's got to take this medication.
Post-traumatic stress syndrome, they'd call it now, right?
Yeah, exactly. And now, but these same people, my mum and dad, are becoming aware of like drugs, just generally, but, not for a long time, and saying, no, you shouldn't take drugs. And my simple brain said, well, I make no differentiation between Valium and Librium, and heroin and cocaine and alcohol, the things that alter your mood, And if they alter your mood in a way that you find enjoyable, and you ignore that little quiet voice inside that says it's an illusion, then you just start taking those things. But I remember like looking at the Valium and Librium in these capsules, and the colours were so incredible. It was like colours I'd never seen before. They were almost like magic beans, And then I'd open a capsule up and I'd pour the powder out slowly and see that little glints. It was almost like opening up a Valium pill or a Librium pill. I could pour it out. It was almost like a Milky Way coming out of there. Do you know what I mean? The little sparkles. Yeah, exactly that. So that was my first encounter. I can't remember if I actually tried one or two. Yeah, I don't think I did at that age. But when I was 17 and I was coming around from this like major 8-hour operation on my right lung, then they gave me morphine to take the pain away, right? But it was just intramuscular, because remember, this is like 1967, right? Yeah. So I came around after the operation, and I'd basically been assaulted, like cut wide open from the front right round under my arm to the back, and they pulled my ribs apart so they could get into the whole lung. And then they burned the skin off my lung, which was, going to kill me if I didn't have that skin burned off, right? And the idea is they burn all of that skin off, then they put tubes inside you, and over the next 5 or 6 days, your lung kind of builds a new skin, which is the right, it's the right kind of skin. And so, but they didn't prepare me for like, well, it's going to be like a war. We're basically going to cut you wide open, pull your ribs back up almost over your head so we can get there and burn all this stuff off. It's called a pleurectomy, right, where you just remove all the skin of the lung. So when I came round, I was like in intensive care, and I was like, couldn't even, it was so painful just to breathe, So, and I was like in real pain. And I remember the nurse like putting the needle in my leg, my thigh, just boom. And straight away the pain went away, but I was still like all trussed up and everything. But the immediate pain went away. But you build up a resistance very quickly to those things, So after like 3 or 4 hours, I was saying, nurse, I want an injection. And I'll never forget, she said, oh, we can't give you one. You've got to wait another 2 hours. I said, but I'm in pain now. Give it to me, And that was my first taste of morphine, which, of course, is, heroin and opium. They're all part of the same family. So that was my first encounter with this feeling that was stronger than anything I'd ever experienced before. But it was only later that I realized there might be some connection between that first taste of morphine and my sort of like experiments with drugs. I must say here to anybody that's listening, if I seem to be talking about drugs a lot in a certain, it's within the context of that time of my life. But I've been clean of like all drugs since '87, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, speed, because I used the same kind of prism to look at my situation. I knew that when I was a child, when I didn't come out of my mother's womb with a needle in my arm or a $20 bill or a £5 note up my nose or, like
Did you not find anything beneficial in a sense that it would help speed, pun intended, speed along the kind of creative process for you as a musician or a writer?
Well, the thing is, I never ever, and to this day, don't regard myself as a musician. To me, musicians are like a breed apart, and I've learned a language to be able to communicate with them, right? I'm just an artist, like looking for, not looking like consciously, like by putting one foot in front of the other and saying, oh yeah, I need to find that. I never kind of like ask the universe for anything. I've just found a very simple way to connect now since like the 80s. Just to say, well, when I came out of my mother's womb, I didn't come out with a rabbi or a mullah or a priest or a military man or a judge or anybody on my shoulder to help me make sense of the world. I was helpless. The only thing I needed was love. And the love at that time was, you know, my mother putting food in my mouth, wiping my backside, and singing Rockabye Baby to me, you know. That was it. So how did I arrive at a situation when I was growing up where I thought I knew what I was doing and I thought I was intelligent, but I was actually using my intelligence in a dumb way? Because when I first came to London, it was most probably just before my 18th birthday, but I wasn't keeping time then. You know, my emotional memory and mental memory run on different kind of grids, you know, so I wasn't able to step outside of myself and say, oh, well, I'm fucked up, but one day this information of my journey is going to be of use to me and perhaps to other people. So I wasn't remembering things through that kind of grid, you know, placing experiences in different parts of my brain to be sort of like brought out. But there was a complication in 1970, you know, when I was 19, before I got to my birthday. I went through a car windscreen in Germany and I was under the influence of liquid LSD, right? And I should have died in the crash. And I've realized many years later, about 7 years later, somebody was talking to me about this island called Ibiza in the, you know, Balearic Isles, you know.
I've heard of
and
Ibiza.
I thought, wow, that sounds really fucking good. This is long before, you know, it was a dance.
Club scene started, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it had been sort of like part of the jet set, you know, sort of like going. Anyway, so this person is talking to me like 7 years after my crash, talking to me about Ibiza, and then they mentioned, and I'm thinking, wow, that sounds really cool. And then they mentioned a bar called El Mono Desnudo, the Naked Ape. And suddenly it was like as if somebody had put a carousel on in my head, right? And they, you know, put the film on of my experiences in Ibiza. And I was like, oh my God, I've been there. I lived there for a month and it all came back to me. Yeah? And I thought, how come this like really important experience in my life is not in the forefront of my mind? Because, you know, with memory, we use our memory to sort of, we experience something. You know, we choose an avenue that we want to go down. Something bad happens, we come back to the starting point and say, well, let's see what other options, you know, what's plan B? Yeah? And so, but if you haven't got those things in the forefront of your brain, it's like being a child experiencing everything for the first time again. And it's only when you make a mistake that it reminds you that, hey, wait a minute, I've been in this situation before. It's like a very sort of like reverse deja vu, you know? So it was like 7 years previously, I'd been in Ibiza, and when I had that experience, I thought, fucking hell, how come I'd forgotten all about that? But now that the reel's been put back on in my head, I remember everything about it. But it wasn't there in the forefront of my memory. And I thought, what else have I experienced that's a dim, distant memory being locked away in the back of my, you know, the back of my consciousness?
And why was it? Because you were in a kind of, behind a veil of the effect of drugs at the time, that it wasn't?
No, it was, well, I mean, the most important thing was that I went through a car windscreen at 80 miles an hour and I should have been dead. Yeah? And they kept me awake.
How was it, in droplets in a pipette?
Well, I'd taken some acid, right?
Yeah.
On the journey through.
It wasn't on blotting paper, though, was it? It was liquid, you said?
No, it was liquid. It was liquid.
Whoa.
I used to get it from a friend of mine that knew a chemist and knew a doctor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was that liquid. It was very strong. And again, nobody really knew. There was nobody to warn me. Like the first time that I took LSD, I didn't know anything about perceptual constancy and how we all build up a perceptually constant picture of the world, which is not actually a true image of the world. It's actually a construct that we make available to ourselves so that we can get through life. The same way that we develop a personality, which is, well, I developed a personality that stopped people from getting close to me. Because there were things that I had to deal with myself that I wasn't prepared to deal with at the time. You know, I just wanted the sex and drugs and rock and roll. I was that kid in a candy shop that had been set free. But then I started to find out very quickly that just because something feels good, do it. Well, let's take the analogy of food. Food tastes nice, chocolate tastes nice. Let's, eat loads of it. What happens? We get obese. And it's the same spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. But the 60s was very much built around like, hey, for hippies and visionaries, if it feels good, let's do it. And, we thought that by taking those steps, that we're being like these bold warriors, stepping out into space. And some of them were. I mean, every generation brings its own small percentage of people that are natural visionaries, invisible saints, mystics, shaman, whatever, you know. And these people have the natural gift to articulate the dreams and aspirations of a generation, through music, art, fashion, club culture. But I've only been able to get a coherent overview of what I was going through intuitively, in the last kind of like 20 years, when I, confronted myself and said, well, look, I'm laying here, I can't run anymore, but every day I wake up with this feeling of fear and vulnerability in the pit of my being. And then I assemble a personality to cover that, to protect that child inside of me. So really, personality is just like looking in the wardrobe each day and saying, well, what am I doing today? Which outfit shall I put on to mediate between me and the rest of the world? And that's what I did for a long, long time. But I was doing that through fear. So in the 80s, I got busted for heroin. I was in police custody, and I knew that my life was over, basically. If I didn't face up to myself there and then, my life was over. Yeah? And I realized
what was the epiphany? Because you were in a band, you became like a singer in a punk band, essentially, which was very much on the scene. You rejected kind of being like swept up in the kind of the music scene, in the sense that you rejected offers for a record deal. You did, which I guess is the true sense of punk, that you don't want to be part of the establishment or kind of like altered and absorbed in it. What did you have an epiphany that turned you into wanting to do music?
Well, for me, remember, I was a teenager in the 60s. So apart from anything that was happening internally with me, I was also being subjected to something that a whole generation had never been subject to before. The idea of finding your identity through being a teenager, right? And so, we were bombarded with the Beatles and the Stones and all these crazy things, Velvet Underground in America. They were all kind of like appealing, but they were appealing through the music. So there was my kind of like, well, this is the backdrop to my own teenage years, but on a much deeper level, I was also experiencing it almost on a quantum level because of my childhood, the way I looked at the stars, the way words helped me. So I've always been a writer. That's what I say. Even if people see me on stage and see me singing and say, oh, wow, you're a great singer, you're a great performer. It's just me as a writer. I'm up there as a writer, throwing the things out that I've learned about myself. Generally, when I do a show, it's like a bit of a con, really, because I know my songs are brilliant because I fucking wrote them, and I know the place I wrote them, and I know by my understanding that when I chose not to be a musician, I thought that music was far too beautiful to just contain it in this label called musician. There was nowhere. And from what I saw of music, I mean, I've got lots of great musician friends, and to me, the real ones are ones that have learned their craft, and they're using music. But a lot of people are like using music as, well, it's a great career to have. It's a career move. Now, I never, ever thought that record labels knew anything about music, or they didn't feel it in the way that I did. So it was easy for me to say no to everything. Now, when I played at the Roxy, which was Britain's first punk club, like in January 1977, like in the film, I walked in there and I said to the people that were running it, Andrew Tchaikovsky and Susan Carrington, I said, I hear you put bands on that can't get gigs anywhere else. And they said, yeah, what's the name of your band? I said, The Rejects. I'm standing in the middle of this so-called punk club at the beginning of the revolution. I had long hair. I wasn't, there was no way I was getting my head shaved, just to sort of like look like other people. There was no interest in that. And so Andrew said, yeah, you're playing here next Tuesday supporting the Damned, the Adverts and the Vibrators. So in the next 4 or 5 months, I supported the Damned, their 3-time Sham 69 Generation X with a young Billy Idol, the Jam with an 18-year-old, whatever his name is. And, I just played and supported everybody. So
had you been on stage prior to that as a performer in any kind of capacity? Or did you just kind of go, oh,
no, not really.
I'm starting next week.
Well, yeah. In 76, I was 26. And I was still disillusioned with my so-called heroes and leaders from the 60s having gone soft. And I had to admit to myself, they're just like great rock bands or blues bands or singer-songwriters, but they've given in to the establishment, because by then I was already hip to the fact that the means of production, distribution and media had been taken over by the establishment in the 60s. Because I can remember when I was 11 or 12, and having a natural kind of empathy with the civil rights movement in North America. Where did that come from? There were no black people in our town. The population then of about 180,000 people. No indigenous black people in Sunderland. I can remember when the first TV arrived in our street, it was black and white. And the only images that we got of black people were, is we free, Mercer? Is we really free? Yeah. Or the singing and dancing. Oh, yeah, you know, sort of Sammy Davis. Yeah, he's a great dancer and he's a great mover, but he's almost that one. That was a kind of prevalent attitude, not because most of the people there were racist. It was that all they knew, all the images that they were ever given of black people from birth were these same things. Now, I remember sort of like being completely captivated at it goes back to what I was going to tell you about when I was 11 and I passed my 11 plus. In society's eyes, I was blessed. I was lucky. I was going to go to this fabulous school and then go to university. And it didn't feel like that to me. So when I was 11 or 12, I used to feel like I was being force-fed concrete, because in history lessons, when the Irish Christian brother was trying to give us one version of history, the words would be leaping off the page at me and saying, no, that's not what we mean. Yeah. We mean something different. This person has captured us and put us together in a way. So I had this really beautiful relationship with words, and it was a very active, conscious thing. So what was the question again?
Well, just was it? I'm surprised you don't do poetry then. Was being in a punk band perhaps the right move for you, even though you were like
right? Well, now going back to what I was leading up to. So bearing in mind the fact that '76 came around. And by then, I'd realised that the establishment, by controlling the means of production, distribution, and especially the media, they hijacked that potentially revolutionary energy. Hold on, I'm just going to plug the battery in. They'd hijacked the potential revolutionary energy of our generation, you know, by saying, wait a minute, the more we try to stamp out this forest fire of teenage revolution, the more we spread it. Let's just have a listen and see what these children want. Oh, they want sex and drugs and rock and roll. Wonderful. We'll control it. We'll give it to them in a way that keeps them quiet. Because a 14-year-old boy in his bedroom in the north of England in '64 singing, hey, the time is right for fighting in the streets, boys. But what can a poor boy do except to sing for a rock and roll band? Sleepy London town, there's just no place for street fighting men. Now, I loved the Stones in the '60s. Their music was incredible. You know, the whole thing with Brian Jones was fantastic stuff.
At what point were they bought off and absorbed into the establishment?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I used to kind of slag them off for doing that, but then I thought, well, wait a minute, I had a hard enough time coming to terms with it, and I didn't have any power. So what must it have been like for Mick Jagger especially? I mean, Mick Jagger went to the London School of Economics. If you listen to the words of his early songs and Sympathy for the Devil, they're fucking classic, you know? They could have been written by one of the greatest poets that ever lived. So I was already thinking that the Stones, and especially Mick Jagger, the things that they were saying were kind of revolutionary. But by the time '76 came around, I realised, well, the establishment's been able to buy everybody off. Yeah, it took them about 3 or 4 years to destabilise the whole hippie movement and the civil rights movement in North America, because you know the CIA were very heavily involved in the late '50s and early '60s. Sort of importing or working with gangs that were, bringing marijuana and cocaine to America to stabilize the black community, especially on the East Coast. But on the West Coast, more importantly, where the intellectuals were and where Timothy Leary came from, this whole generation of visionaries all advocating that acid is God. Yeah. Now, all the time you're taking acid, you've got to see how empire was created. Empire was created.
Yeah, well, I've read that, isn't it? The CIA, there was an influx of LSD and stuff, along with Leary and a bunch of other people like John Lilly and things. That the CIA was kind of behind that kind of influx of, I guess, drugs into the American college system in the '60s and stuff.
And it was deliberately done to destabilize. Yeah. Right. I mean, in effect, it's almost like the establishment created the underground. So that I'm not saying that everybody that was involved in the underground was a stooge of the CIA or whatever, because it's a very hard thing to come to terms with, when you see what's really, really going on in the world and the people that pull the levers was going into conspiracy theories. This is not conspiracy, it's fact, right? Yeah. Which the establishment will then turn around and say, oh, we've heard it all before, yes. And then they they create the kind of like what I call the David Icke effect, you know? I mean, David Icke is like pure ego. The things that he's talking about are things that certain people have known about for a while, but you've got to know your enemy and turn your enemy's weapons against them. You can't just walk to confront the establishment and say, oh yeah, and there are people come from other planets and this, that, and the other. If I had an alien sitting in my front room now, I'm not going to run around organising a tour. Yeah.
What do you think of David Icke's general theory? Because I think a lot of the stuff he comes out with is all very right and good, and he says some really great and interesting and true things, but he kind of like spoils it with this idea that the Queen and the establishment are all secret blood-drinking space reptiles. Of course, you can't have any... There's no proof of that, so you can't really argue it either way.
And,
but you can't,
no matter how much your intuition tells you that it may be true, until you've got proof in the language of the people that you would seek to convince, then it's like speaking in Russian to somebody that only understands Chinese.
It's almost like he's been establishmentized in the fact he talks about all this truth, and then he kind of deconstructs or kind of disinformations himself into a corner by saying, oh, by the way, the caveat is they're all blood-drinking space vampires, reptilians, if you will. It's a lot of conspiracy people kind of do that. They have a kind of hook, which is their kind of stock in trade. They tell a lot of truth, and then they give you 10% completely bonkers stuff, which kind of like undoes the truth they've said. I mean, a lot of them do that.
And you know, there are certain like rules and laws in psychology that explain all that, you know, and they become like demagogues, you know, and like a lot of them are great sort of great speakers because of the information that they're given. But you know, with David Icke, it's like people don't say to me, oh, you know, this thing that David Icke was talking. Well, forget David Icke as a person, but this idea is really interesting. He promotes himself.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I can remember when he was a goalkeeper for Coventry. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to put him down because of that. He might have been a great goalkeeper, but in public sensibility, if you're going to go from like, well, I've been on television as a sports commentator, but now I am the Messiah. That's the thing. He sets himself up as being like, as if he's seeing things that nobody else has ever seen before, and he's sent to save the world.
Yeah. I wonder what the trigger for that actually was, because you've had your own kind of like, I guess, epiphanies. Maybe you could shed light on this. Maybe not that the same thing has happened to you, but you kind of come to, like you said, an ego construct.
Yeah.
What do you think the trigger for him was to send him kind of, when he came on Wogan that time back in the day and said, you know, I'm the Godhead, I have the answer and stuff, and he kind of got laughed off the stage, didn't he, at the time? And then he became this kind of world famous conspiracy researcher.
Yeah.
Is it all just ego? Did he get hit in the head? Did he take drugs, do you think? Do you think there was some trigger that kind of sent him down that road?
I don't know, perhaps the footballs that people used to play with when he was
headbutting them.
Heading them out. There's been quite a few footballers that have got early onset, like Alzheimer's, you know. So,
yeah.
I mean, I couldn't say that because I don't know him personally. I'm sure he'd be quite happy to sort of like give his own version of a Damascene moment. But to me, because it's such a leap from him being like Coventry goalkeeper and a sports commentator to then suddenly, I mean, it could have been anything. He could have read any one of 100 books that I've read, but then reading it through the filter of ego, like, oh, I've got a home here.
Yeah.
And I get the impression he most probably did have some kind of Damascene moment for himself, but you can't rewrite that Damascene moment. You can't come into town and say, well, you know, I was a tax collector for one of the most vicious governments that's ever ruled over its people. And then I was traveling by Maserati, and the Maserati developed wings and took me on a scoot around the earth. And when I came back, the things I'd seen, you know, on other planets, just like convinced me that I've got to tell everybody about it. You know, it's like, you can't fucking rewrite history like that. Okay, if you've had that personal thing, why do you need to be going around converting everybody to your way of thought? Because ultimately, none of us is ever going to have a complete vision of objective truth. Like I said earlier, basically my brain is a box of illusions occasionally opened by a fool, me. Yeah. So if it turns out that when I open that box of illusions, I see something that enables me to be almost mythically able to draw a circle around the universe, which of course I can't do because I'm a finite being in an infinite universe, in an eternal state of like, what the fuck's going on, yeah? But if I have found a way to be able to articulate my situation in a way that allows me to pass through this veil of tears, you know, to be in this world, but not of this world of sense and desire. If I found a way to do that, surely I've got to say to myself, well, every day I say a little kind of like, I remind myself of something that I say, let today be the day that I learn something that turns everything I thought I previously knew upside down. Because love doesn't have a top or a bottom. There's no up or down in space. And if I'm going to be so happy that I can say I'm so happy I could die, the only way I'd be happy to drop dead now would be if I was spiritually connected in a loving way with the one thing that I know exists and is not, you know, good or bad. It just is, and that's the fucking universe, which goes back to me being a child, listening to the stars singing, watching them dance. There is no singular experience I have had in life anywhere with somebody else or with myself, no more, nothing that's more real to me than being a child listening to the stars singing. Simple. Now, I could have been written off as some kind of like lunatic or whatever, but hey, they're finding out more and more about synesthesia, you know, where the highways in the brain, the neural highways get crossed over. And synesthesia, to me, I can't imagine not having synesthesia. How could people fucking survive in a world where they don't hear colors? When they don't see sounds, when they don't see the implication, like somebody speaks to me and, you know, that whatever they're saying activates a movie in my head with its own soundtrack. How can people not live with that? Yeah? The idea that so many people are walking around and they haven't even activated their mind properly, or their spirit, or their consciousness, or their intuition. They're not even aware of these things, yeah? And when we become aware of these things, well, you know, we've got to develop them and activate them in a balanced, integrated way, you know, the mind, spirit, consciousness, intuition. And hopefully by doing that, we'll arrive at a place where we can walk through this life and not be of it, you know, like through experience, you know what I mean? But that little voice that we were talking about earlier on, you know, that used to say yes to sex and drugs and rock and roll when I was about 17, 18. The little quiet voice inside me was saying, no, you need to rethink this. That's not the answer. But, you know, I was a young man. I wanted to experience everything, all the senses. So I conveniently didn't listen to that quiet voice. So the things that seemed most real and most intense to me at that time were the sex and drugs and rock and roll, especially the drugs. And I thought, well, let's suppose the only way to a higher reality and to get those feelings that I get from drugs is from drugs. Yeah, and the little quiet voice inside me was saying, delusion, delusion. Yeah, and I said, well, let me try.
Do you not think there are some benefits with psychedelics where you do kind of see through all that stuff? Because I think the argument is for certain psychedelics like ayahuasca and LSD is you're seeing stuff that is already there. You're kind of just changing the frequency, the receiver wave signal, if you will, and how you experience life. Were there no benefits at all in like some of the experiences you had?
Well, first of all, before talking about the experiences, it's very interesting that we should recognize how we get that information. Is there any, like the transmitting formulas, formats that bring that information to me? Yeah. How much are they controlling the way I see things? See, it's just called perceptual constancy, right? How we make sense of the world. All that happens with acid and any other drug is it breaks down that perceptual constancy like a veil, so we can see this incredible universe that we've already created, a construct that we're comfortable with. It changes that, it removes it for a while, so we can see beyond. But if we haven't understood how we actually perceive things, how that actually works, then all we're doing potentially is replacing one construct with another, but another one that's sort of like, it's a classic thing of mistaking the sign for the thing signified. I mean, I took, you know, lots and lots of acid, right? And for about the first 100 trips, I thought I was dying. I was convinced I was dying because I didn't know anything about, well, I'm going to have a vision of the universe that is different from the way I perceived it up until now. Right. And the way I perceived it up until now is in direct relation to when I was a baby. And, you know, when Einstein was 6 months old and having his nappy change, he wasn't thinking, oh, Mum, hurry up and change my nappy because I need to grow up quickly to, you know, to develop the theory of relativity, right? We're all helpless as children. We've all got synesthetic brains. There's a very interesting experiment that's kind of done, like, you know, neuroscience is the hip new science. And they're starting to discover so many things about the way the brain works. Whereas previously in the past, we've all been concerned, the basis of all science and art has been concerned with the things that we see when perceptual constancy breaks down, yeah? And taking those things that we've seen as being, wow, the ultimate proof that we're on the right path. There's a philosophical notion that the enlightened man, capital M, because within that I mean womankind as well, yeah? That the enlightened man passes through 7 valleys or 7 veils, right? Very few people actually reach the 6th valley, which is called the Valley of Ecstasy. But of the ones that do on their journey to find paradise, they arrive in the Valley of Ecstasy and then they see the sign to the next valley which says paradise. And they go, wow, my God, I've had a Damascene moment. It's just so real to me, great. Woo, woo. And then they jump around and get lost in the reverie of their discovery. Yeah. Then they collapse and wake up in the Valley of Ecstasy with that feeling from the night before of like, oh my God, that was the most real thing that's ever happened to me. Yeah. And it feels so real and so on. So then they party again. And all the time when they wake up and they see paradise is in the next valley, but they're having so much fun indulging themselves in the fun of being in the Valley of Ecstasy. And then this kind of spiritual arrogance kicks in where, okay, I'm going to be selective. I really like the Valley of Ecstasy. I'm going to stay here. Right. Yeah. And so it's a classic case of mistaking the sign for the thing signified.
Right.
Yeah?
So you think it's all just illusion then? There's no kind of like benefit to be had from coming away from those experiences?
I can only speak from personal experience, right? And in my personal experience, I know that if I'd been taught about perceptual constancy, the notion of it, if I'd been taught, when I was old enough to understand these things, if I'd been told, look, when you look in the mirror, you think you're seeing you, but you're not seeing you. It's got nothing to do with it's a reflection, yeah? Mm-hmm. But if I start sort of like seeing my reflection through a spiritually like materialistic lens, then I'm going to start seeing myself as part of the thing that I'm discovering, but through my ego. Yeah? Now, I know lots of people that say to me, oh, I didn't take a lot of acid, but it was really important, the experience. And if it was important for them and it was a way for them to realize it's an example of downward self-transcendency that pushes you towards upward self-transcendency, then that can only be a good thing. But in my case, because of my own background, my own experiences, when I took acid, I was breaking down this perceptually constant picture of the world. And what was behind there were just like horrific things from like school days, that had interrupted my loving affair with the universe from being a child. So I'm not here to say that because of what I experienced, that other people should experience it the same. That's why I don't preach to anybody. I mean, sometimes when I'm talking to people, they're like, oh my God, you should write a book. I've been asked to write a book to redefine borders for emerging nations. I've been asked to rescue books from libraries. It goes on and on and on. You just become the center. You become like a cult figure. And it's like, I always say, because I say every day, let today be the day that I learn something that turns everything I previously believed upside down. Hey, if I'm talking to people about the experiences I've had, like, oh, Bruno, what's the answer to this? The answer to this is don't ask me a fucking question.
Well, you're on the wrong show for that, Bruno.
I mean, and no, but you can ask it in different ways, right? Yeah, right. So, one time when I was stripping, I realized the uselessness of words, that the answer is in the question. And instead of somebody asking me a question, right, actually look and find the answer for yourself that you're comfortable with. And then the only way you'll find the answer that you're comfortable with is by going inwards, connecting to the universe and elevating your own frequency, your own level of vibration. And then the science of sound will tell you, if you work consciously on elevating that signal, that wave will go out there and it will be heard and picked up by people either broadcasting and transmitting and receiving on that same frequency, or what they call a sympathetic frequency, like overtones and undertones, right? So really, I didn't speak for 3 days one time when I was tripping. And anybody, when they asked me a question, I'd go, like, look back at which part of you asked that question. And you haven't been able to find an answer for yourself, or you have found an answer for yourself, But you don't want to be alone with that, because human beings are gregarious by nature. So then it's only natural that if we experience some kind of like revelation, or we have a devastating moment or an epiphany, of course, as human beings, we're going to want to share that with other people. Yeah.
Have you not found sometimes an acid, though, perhaps when someone's also tripping, without speaking to each other, you can just look and you already know the question and the answer between you two, so that it's on the tip of your tongue, the answer and their question, but you're going, I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't speak for 3 days once, you know, but I then had to realize that even though I thought I was having this amazing telepathic conversation with somebody, like, and I'm not saying anything, right? And then they go away, and I think, yeah, they got it. We were both on the same trip. But after many, many years, if I'd spoken to that person years later and said, oh, remember that time when we didn't speak, but we understood exactly what we were talking about? And then they say, yeah, I was thinking about donuts. And you think, I can never think anybody's thoughts or feel anybody else's feelings. That has to be the opening, you know, the opening gambit. That's where I start from. I can never think your thoughts or feel your feelings, but through an understanding of myself and the way I perceive the world, there is a possibility that I can find myself in an agreeable situation with somebody else who seems to have experienced something similar. And so we don't have to talk about it, because again, it all works through love, and love as an energy. And the characteristics of love are, well, love is about action. Yeah? Love's unconditional, love's compassionate, and it's unselfish. Yeah? But it's about actions. By their actions ye shall know them. Yeah? Because otherwise we just disappear into philosophical debates going round and round and round until we disappear up our collective anus, which is doubling up as a black hole in space.
Isn't your music and your writing, though, a way of expressing your thoughts and feelings? I mean, you say don't ask Bruno for the answers of anything, or don't ask the questions, because you only have your own answers, and obviously only if it's through your prism, it's through your prism. They can't understand what the world's seeing it through your eyes. But still, with your music, your writing, I presume, you are kind of expressing some form of, you know, this is how I see the world, this is my perception of life and stuff, no?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not saying, because it's my perception of life and I'm so comfortable with it, that you've got to do it the same way as me.
No, of course not. But then what's the vehicle which was your writing and music? What was the point of kind of doing that? What was the desire to kind of express yourself in that way, perhaps?
Because I found that in 1986, I discovered a law of nature that says at any given time, less than 0.0000001% of the population of this planet are conscious of the true nature of things. The rest are asleep. Now, bearing in mind the fact that I'd had such a fascist sort of like overview of my life imposed on me by Irish Christian brothers, when I discovered that law that while so few people are conscious of the true nature of reality, I was aware of the fact that this is me, my personal, you know, subjective like revelation. Right? It doesn't mean that I've got to go around punishing 99.999% of the world for not protecting me against Irish Christian brothers, or not preparing me for things that I needed, that I was actually discovering myself. So when I first discovered it, I thought, wow, let's just suppose that I'm one of these small band of people that's actually conscious of things. Yeah. It does not make me any better than anybody else. Again, getting back to the David Icke thing, I don't feel the need to run out and say to everybody, no, I've discovered this, and because I've discovered this, you've all got to perceive it in exactly the same way. I've prepared it for you. I'm your guru. Yeah, you've got to listen to what I say and then just repeat everything that I say in the situation that you think we share. Yeah. Right? Which is why a lot of people, when I have like person one-on-one talks, they say, oh, but you should write a book. It could do so much. I say, yeah. If I wrote a book, what's going to happen? Especially if I wrote a book about how most men are, 12-year-old pushing 20, 30, 40, they hit puberty and don't really develop after that. I've had so many women say, oh yeah, write a book. And I say, do you know what? I'd be on Oprah Winfrey show as the man that understands women. Yeah. I'd make millions of pounds, right? But I wouldn't help one woman, because any guys that want to take advantage of women would read what I'd written, see that women really love it, And then they just, use that, Renaissance man, and, la, 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 la.
Well, someone wrote that book. It was called The Game, wasn't it, a couple of years ago? Do you remember that? How to pick up women and kind of...
Yeah, I remember hearing something about it. Yeah. It might have been somebody that I met in New York in '86 when I'd had that dumb scene.
You planted the seed.
Yeah, but, the point about, well, why should what I see in the world, why should I sort of put it out there as music and as right if I think that the questioner has the answer in the question. But that's just looking at it in a linear way. By saying, well, there's part of me that's looking for an answer outside of myself, and I'm asking somebody that I respect.
Yeah.
Because it seems to have had, from conversation, seems to have had similar experiences, and, that these people are actively, in a loving way, seeking answers to not only elevate themselves, but to also elevate mankind in a certain way. But I take more of kind of like a Zen view on that, that if what I'm experiencing is so real and it's enabled me to change my life completely, from one of living in abject fear to being able to see that, love's the only worthwhile bond in any relationship, then if somebody comes to me, then it's for me to see that, well, okay, this is what attracts certain people to my music. Or to my writings, or just like talking, engaging one-on-one situations. I'm pretty much like Zen on that, in that if I change me and I live in a particular way that sends out signals to one person, and they come to me and I say, I teach what I need to learn. Anything that you think you're learning from and with me, I am learning with you of equal value. And what I'll ask you to do is take away and examine which part of yourself is seeing whatever you think you see in me that's beneficial, and then affect the person next to you. So whenever I'm with people, if I affect one person in that way and I help them to switch the light on, or help them to make sense of what they think they're seeing, based on the fact that no matter how convinced we are of things, who knows? I wouldn't start my own church, because guess what, if I'm wrong, I don't want to be responsible for taking anybody to the hell that Tony Blair occupies, So, yes, I'm just describing what I've experienced. Now, getting back to what I was saying earlier on about having a brilliant live band, I wasn't saying that from an egotistical point of view. What I was saying is, from experience, I know I can go out and play, and the vast majority of people will love those songs because of what I put into them. But then I also sometimes explain at shows, you're not allowed to clap. If you think that I've come here, the whole purpose of my life is to do something to make you clap and go, oh yeah, you're great, can I borrow your record? Then they're in the wrong place. I ask them to leave the building. Or you can stay in here if you promise to be on your best behavior, right? And I say to people, no clapping. Zen Buddhist meditation, clap with one hand and dedicate the energy from the other hand to saving this fucking planet that we're all fucking up for ourselves and children and grandchildren. So really the real part of the show for me is the things that I say in between the songs, because I go up there and tell people I've got love in my heart. I lived for many years with fear in my heart, and I know which I prefer. I went back and rescued that little boy inside of me, walked him through the wreckage of my life, introduced him to the 32-year-old Bruno, and said, we'll never be separated again, and we'll never walk in fear again. These songs are a product of that. Now, I could just be like a fucking snake oil charmer, in the Wild West, selling things off the, the back of a wagon and convincing
snake oil salesman.
Yeah, convincing people with my oratory. Actually, going back to what you were saying about, people like, that convince people by saying a couple of things that are undoubtedly true and then throwing 80% of like whatever they want to propagate in your mind. It's a well-known psychological fact that the brain will take in three things, like groups of threes, in a much more readily available way than just saying two of them, or 4 or 20, right? And it's the way all these preachers work. I went to this born-again church to see how they work, right? The preacher was like a Las Vegas showman, right? What you do is you know that people are more suggestible if you give them bites of 3 things. But what you do is the first 2 things that you tell them, are things that are incontrovertible. And as sure as water is wet, and as sure as you're la 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 la, then Jesus came to give you life, eternal life. So they say two things that nobody can argue with. And while you're open to that, oh yeah, I agree with that. Oh yeah, I agree with that. Oh, do. You know. And so these people always talk in threes. And if you look at any great orators or dictators in history, when they're talking, most of them do that. You know, they introduce you to the first two things. But you've already experienced that in, you know, in what you said to me. So it's by understanding the way the brain perceives things that we can then deceive them if we choose to deceive them.
How did you take the information? Well, not the information. When it was proposed to you by Elizabeth Ramsden, is that the lady who made the documentary about you?
Rasmussen, yeah.
Rasmussen. Sorry, Elizabeth, I got your surname wrong. I apologise. Yeah, what was your reaction to that when she was like, I want to make a documentary about you?
Well, the thing is, I was kind of like conned with that because I realised after it was made, that she already had her own agenda and she wanted me to fit into that agenda.
But what was the agenda? I mean, what?
The agenda was for her to be this woman in her first-time director's role, finding a poor, unfortunate soul who was homeless and helpless, and make a documentary about his life to inspire people that had been homeless and drug addicts and this, that, and the other. It was very much like as if she discovered my story. I've had people that wanted to make films about me for the last 25 fucking years. Yeah.
So why? Because you seem in the documentary, you seem quite close. I mean, she's the first person you call when you've been to the hospital and stuff, and you seemed like very kind of connected, if you will. Yeah, I mean, the documentary does come away with like a positive light for someone who can kind of still keep going and not kind of quit, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the truth of the matter is she actually manipulated some of the things. You know, there's a scene where I'm in hospital, right? And there's no explanation of what I'm in hospital for, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's talked about in terms of my illness was the hepatitis C. So anybody seeing that scene of me laying in bed would be forgiven for thinking that I was ill in bed with hepatitis C, but now I'd been cured, and I'm telling Elizabeth on the phone. There were two completely separate things. When I got cured of the hepatitis C, after a 3-month checkup, then the doctors that were running the trial program for the wonder drug that cured me of Hep C, right?
How long has that been around? Because I didn't know you could cure Hep C so easily. Is it really?
Yeah, no, this is a classic case of why I would sort of like do the show. I've got friends of mine, punk musicians in California, that are dying of Hep C, and yet there's a new drug that I got on the National Health Service, which was developed in America, that has a 98% success rate. When I was diagnosed with hepatitis C, I was at stage 5. Stage 6 is liver cancer, transplant, death, or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was also genotype 1, which meant that I had the lowest percentage chance of being cured with the standard treatment of interferon and whatever else they use.
Right.
And so it couldn't have been any more advanced than it was with me. Yeah? So I got on the research program, and you know, after 3 months, they never say you're cured. What they say is there's no trace of it. You know, it's like you're free of it, but they never say you're cured because they don't know. Somebody might get it back in 10 years' time. Yeah? So anyway, when I was told after 3 months that I was clear of the virus, they said that's the good news. But the bad news is we've detected something where, you know, you need to have a test on your heart. Yeah.
Right.
So they did these heart tests, and I've got sleep apnea, you know, where I stop breathing 7 or 8 times a night. And people say,
I get that.
Terrifying.
Broken nose.
So it's not fucking terrifying because you just don't wake up. If you don't wake up, then there's not this conscious person standing on this side saying, oh no, I want to wake up in the morning. So
that's a good way to go, nice and peacefully.
So when I wake up, I go, yeah, I've still got sleep apnea. That's brilliant. And I'll come through it. And it makes me celebrate every moment of being alive. It's like being given another chance, you know, as opposed to that, because I confront my physical mortality. And by confronting it, I learn to connect with the eternal nature of my being. And that's where all of my words and songs come from. And going back to, you know, when I was writing in the 70s, before I got bust and, you know, rescued that little boy inside of me, then I was still subject to, I still had the same kind of intelligence. I still had the same kind of mental faculties, but all the information I received through that was going through a filter of fear in my heart. And fear and love can't live in the same place at the same time. You know, when the sun rises in the morning, it casts out the night. And it's the same with the ascendancy of love in my heart. So once I'd rescued that little boy, I made a pledge that I would never live in fear again. And if I did find myself in a fearful situation, I would stop everything that I was doing and look inside myself and say, what am I actually frightened of? Am I running away from something and demonizing it and giving it life by running away from it? And I'll stand there and deal with that first. Yeah. So it sounds like simplistic and hippie shit, but for me, it's love that saved my life by being connected spiritually. And when I say spiritually, I'm not like, you know, an indie soul floating around waiting to see which religion suits me best, and then selectively decommission the things that I don't agree with. Yeah.
Yeah.
So only I found out much later after the film came out that Elizabeth had her own agenda. Yeah.
Well, I presume any filmmaker would, though, wouldn't they? They would need to put, I guess, there's I mean, Robert Evans said it once, the Hollywood producer, there's your story, my story, and the truth. And it's a mix of all three when you kind of create a piece of art, if you will, or a kind of, you're presenting something. So you weren't happy with the documentary, or an aspect of it, at least? No,
because I found out much later. When she said to me, she came up to me I was working at Crisis. You know, they do this homeless thing every Christmas. You know, they get like 8,000 volunteers to look
Oh,
at
no, I've tried to do that many Christmases until last year, and I was never put on the waiting. I was like on the waiting list. I've never been able to do it. So many people want to do it, yeah.
I'd met Elizabeth there, right? Because she was there with her kind of like boyfriend at the time. But what I didn't know until about 6 months after the thing came out was that she had targeted me.
Was scouting for a story.
Yeah, exactly, right? So not only did I fit it perfectly, it actually blew her mind. Because when she first said to me, she came up to me while I was working, you know, at Crisis over Christmas, right? And, you know, you're in that kind of mood where generally, you know...
Well, it's Christmas.
Yeah, and, you know, you want to uplift them in some way. So if one of the guests starts talking to you, you know, you want them to see something a little bit more outside of their own misery or whatever, you know? And so when Elizabeth came up to me, she's a goodie. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to go to Crisis, you know, because you want to fuck people up. Yeah? But that doesn't mean that you necessarily know the best thing for somebody, especially a homeless person there. I was at Crisis not as a homeless person. I was there as an ambassador. I was a Crisis ambassador. I'd already done it for like a year or two before then, right? And I already had my own position within Crisis, being an ambassador. But she came up to me and she said, oh, yeah, and started chatting as if it was just this serendipitous meeting. I didn't realize she'd had somebody point me out. She'd spoken to the head of Crisis and said, I want to make a film about somebody that's been homeless and then turned their life around, yeah? And so the head of Crisis had said, well, you know, you see it in the film, oh, well, Bruno. But the way it was edited so you didn't get the rest of what that woman said, which was basically, well, technically speaking, he's not homeless. He's here as a Crisis ambassador. And really, he was only kind of like homeless for a week, yeah? But it wasn't like something happened in my life and I was this successful, but found myself on the street, or I've just come back from Afghanistan and I can't, you know, I've got post-traumatic stress or whatever, you know?
Sure.
I was the happiest man in the world then. Yes, at the time, I was living in a hostel, yeah, for homeless people, but it's actually a hostel. And the way Elizabeth put it across was almost as if I was homeless, and then while she was making the documentary, I got back into society, you know, from being homeless. And that was never, ever, ever the case, because the way I became technically homeless for a week was because the guitarist in my band, the original guitarist in the Homosexuals, I'd been living at his place for about 4 years, like using it to store stuff there while I was going to America a lot. I was at the best time in my life. I was, you know, I was going to America. I'd sold my apartment. For the first time in my life, I'd had money to invest in me. And I decided I'm going to spend every penny of it on branding, inverted commas, me and the Homosexuals, the story, but under my control. Yeah? So I started going to New York. I got bands together over there in 2004. So by the time she made the film in whenever it was, 2009, 10 or whatever, I already had like 5 years of like, I'm really happy about the way things are going.
Sure.
Yeah? And so she'd come up to me as a worker, me as an ambassador. And that's what I thought she was talking. So when she first said to me, can I make a documentary about you? After we chatted for about 10 minutes, I said, no. And she said, why? I said, because you don't know me.
Right.
What do you know about me? And that should have set the alarm bells ringing at the time, because up until then, I'm just somebody she's kind of like bumped into. And that's the way she set it up.
How long did it take to film? How long did they follow you for?
Well, she was like kind of going backwards and forwards to Germany to earn money or whatever. But I think most probably it was over like a 6-month period, something like that, you know, when she was around. But when I said to her in the beginning, I said, listen, we won't make a documentary, but we'll make an art project. Yeah, that's what it'll be, because I'm having this treatment. It might not work. I might die. But then again, you know, we're all dying anyway, so I've got no problem with that. I said I want it to be an honest account. You can film me. I'm going to trust you, because I've spent the last 20 years finding creative, conscious people around the world, and by helping them to live their dream, they have become my songs, yeah, but with their own identity. So if I help somebody to be a writer or an author or a filmmaker or a sculptor or whatever, by understanding and helping them to articulate their situations or just giving them encouragement, then when people appreciate their art, they're not going to say, oh, I love their art and it was created by Bruno. They're not going to know anything about me. No. Yeah? Because when we give in love, we don't give to receive. Yeah? The act of like giving in love and somebody receiving it in love is reward in itself. So from the beginning, I was thinking, oh, okay. And I said to her right from the beginning, I said, have you made any films before? She said, no. I said, well, this film's going to be very important for you because it's your first sort of like directorship. What we'll do is you can come with me and just document what you think is important in my life or things that you think are interesting, right? I said, I should be making you sit down here and sign a contract. But because I'm going to give you the benefit and trust you as an artist, we're going to make this documentary. And I said, you're going to meet people in this documentary that are going to blow your fucking mind. Yeah. And the danger is that when you meet these people that blow your mind, that you will secretly go away from the original agreement that you and I made, that this is an art project that we're doing together and we both own it 50-50.
Yeah. So you gave her access to like Stephen Jones and like Marilyn and stuff like that, right?
All my people who I've known since 1980, and I have never once gone to and said, can I use you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was already like doing my own thing. And when I meet people that are like being successful at doing their own thing, I don't run towards them and take up their space. I say from afar, oh, nice work, cool, see you later. Yeah. And I trust that if we do need to come together, we'll come together for a creative or spiritual project. And that's it, which is how I've got 4 songs in Nicole Kidman's new film coming out early in the new year.
Okay.
Yeah? Because the director of that film, John Cameron Mitchell, right, also wrote, starred and directed a cult movie called Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Oh, I love that film. Yeah, I've seen that.
You love that film, yeah?
Yeah.
Now, John, that's the director of the film, he first heard my music ages ago.
Yeah, he plays Hedwig, doesn't he? Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. So about 6 months before Christmas, I get a message on Facebook from another friend of mine, an artist, saying, oh, Bruno, you've got a celebrity fan. And I was like, yeah, okay. But he didn't say anything about it, yeah? And then about a month later, he said, look, I'm playing a part in a film directed by John Cameron Mitchell that did Hedwig and the Angry Inch. And when I mentioned that I knew you, he wanted to be put in contact. So, however many years ago that John first heard the music, he didn't come running towards me. I didn't go running towards him. We just trusted that by doing the things that we felt were the right things to do, eventually our paths would cross in whichever way they were meant to cross.
Yeah.
So, so then when John contacted me and he came over from LA and we went and had a wonderful dinner, and it was amazing. It was like, I couldn't have actually asked the universe for anything better. He was just like a really lovely guy, very creative. He doesn't need to be associated with me to, amplify his fame or his direction. He's always done the things that he's done. I do the things I do. And so it just happened that this project, the film, it's like a sci-fi alien punk movie. So he thought I'd be perfect for it, the music. So, you know, now I've got 3 or 4 songs that'll be part of the official soundtrack. So I don't need to run towards people. I trust that by staying spiritually connected to the universe, putting one foot in front of the other and not asking for anything, that the right people and situations will appear in front of me when I need them, not when I desire them. Yeah?
You're almost having this constant renaissance, aren't you, all through your life, in a sense? You're always getting renewed and find something new, but it always kind of not reinventing yourself in that kind of like force sense. You're just waiting for the, like you said, the universe to bring you these things, and it kind of does when the time is right.
Yeah. And it only does that if I'm spiritually connected to the universe in a loving way. Because, I mean, there's been so many things that have happened in my life in the last 30 years. If I just wanted to monetize it, you wouldn't be anywhere near me interviewing me. I'd be like, you know, I'd just be out there, like, making millions. But the only way to make money like that is by selling your soul.
Sure.
And I'm not prepared to. And that's why I say I'm very fortunate that when I was a very young child, that, you know, being able to listen to the stars singing all night, even though I didn't realize the implications of that, and that words being sent to me as my friends.
Yeah.
I love words. They come in all shapes and sizes. They jump about. Just when you think you put that word in the right place in the sentence, if I haven't put it in the right place in the sentence, I'll get on and write. I'd write a lot of like stream of consciousness stuff. I edit as I go, yeah. But then a word that I haven't quite put in the right place, it'll be bouncing up and down like 2 pages later, and I've got to go back and say, all right, I'm going to explain later, you know. Then you can get to sleep, kind of thing. And it's a beautiful world that I live in terms of my own perception. But, you know, there were lots of like painful moments to get there. So, you know, this ties in with what you were saying earlier about, well, you know, with acid and different drugs, do I not think that some of those experiences, the only way that I am the way I am now is because of those experiences? Well, there's 2 ways of suffering. We can either suffer unconsciously or we can suffer consciously. Right? I did suffer unconsciously because when I said, let's suppose the only way to a higher reality is through drink, drugs, and all kinds of licentious behavior. Well, great, I'm going to take shitloads of drugs, and I will either find that it's an illusion or I'll die.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I made a kind of like semi-conscious decision to do that because something inside of me was telling me, you're going to find out that it's a delusion. That construct with drugs is just basically what's been written about in the Hindu scriptures, the Vedas, for 5,000 years. Yeah. Upward self-transcendence. If you imagine a mountain range where each successive mountain is a little bit lower than the previous one, yeah, right? We take a drug, we're in the valley, we fly to the top of that mountain through the effect of the drug. We look around, we think we see every molecule in the universe, how everything is changing and there's nothing new under the sun. And we just have this wonderful feeling. But then the drug starts to wear off. And as the drug starts to wear off, we slide gently down into the valley. Yeah? But remember, this mountain range, each successive peak is getting lower and lower, and each successive valley is getting lower and lower. So I end up coming down off the mountain when the drug wears off. But I have the memory of the incredible things that I thought were revealed to me on top of the mountain. So what do? I say, I want to get back there. That's the most real experience I've had in my life. So I take another drug, another hit of whatever my chosen poison is, right? I get to the top of the next mountain, which is a little bit lower than the previous one, but I can still look around and think that I'm seeing everything that I saw on the previous mountain, yeah? But unfortunately for me, that transcending of the self through drugs, yeah, the more I take, yeah, the less and less the time lasts. So eventually, I'm taking large amounts of the drug to get on top of that mountain, which is lower than the previous ones. Yeah?
Sure.
Then I'm coming back down into the valley with the memory of what I, you know, took to be real. It's not real reality in itself. It's a memory of what I took to be a real experience. So eventually, no matter how much I take, I'm not getting high anymore. I'm just going down. And then I have to take more of the drink or the drugs, just to level it up. And then more and more, and whatever happens, I keep going down. And then I've reached the point of being an addict, you know?
Sure.
Right? With memories of how things were. Now, when I realized that was what was happening to me, I was in police custody, it looked like I was going to go to jail for years, and I was in the darkest place of my life. But I said, physically, I can't run anymore. What am I going to find if I turn around and face up to these demons? And mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I cannot run anymore. And then I got certain answers. And with that whole upward and downward self-transcendent thing, going down the mountain range like that, but going up and down, up and down, up and down, yeah, that's downward self-transcendence, and I know where that leads. But if downward self-transcendence exists, then upward self-transcendence must exist. How do I get to the top of the mountain, come down in the valley, top of the next mountain, come down the valley? Well, I get to do that through conscious suffering, by looking at myself honestly and saying, fucking hell, I know what happens if I go up the mountain, because I know where that leads to. But how can I get to the top of the mountain and survey everything in the universe? And that encouraged me to climb down into the next valley through conscious suffering. And I went, aha, okay, well, to climb that mountain, I've got to make sure I'm physically, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally equipped. And I'm not at the moment, because I've had 17 years of it, being abused by this delusion. So now I'm going to sit here with the revelation, and I'm going to look at that mountain, and I'm going to work out how much I need to prepare physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally to climb it. And I spent months doing that, getting ready. And the first time I got to the top of the mountain through my own efforts, I saw everything that I'd seen in previous trips and everything in my life.
Right.
And I was like, wow, this is incredible. So I stayed on top of that mountain for a while. And then I looked over to the east and I saw more mountains getting ever higher. And I made a conscious decision then, I'm going to climb down up this mountain, rest and prepare in the next valley, and then climb the next mountain. And that's it. And that's what I've been doing since 1986. But I had to remind myself that when I choose consciously to climb down from the top of that beautiful mountain, I have to be every bit as vigilant as when I was climbing up. Because if I fall off that cliff on the way down, it's the same consequences if I fall off the cliff on the way up. So that's what I've been doing.
So before we wrap up, I mean, would you kind of do anything different? Would you take drugs at all if you had your time over again? Would you stay completely clean of all that kind of stuff?
I could give you a very interesting answer, but I would feel like I was being a bit of a snake charmer.
Why?
Because I'm here now and I'm happy. So the argument could be, well, I will never know whether I could have arrived at this same point of happiness I'm at now if I didn't take drugs. But I know that, like I keep saying, love's the only worthwhile bond in any relationship, whether it's spiritual love, erotic love, agape, platonic love, or family love, the characteristics are the same. And all I know is that I've gotten to where I am now. When I say I'm comfortable with where I am now, I mean I'm comfortable with the fact that there's a lot of discomfort in my life as well. Yeah. Because I use that as a, if it was that easy, I could just blink and go, yeah, man. But life's far too interesting for that. And the universe, well, there are things I know, things I don't know. In between, there are the doors of my own perception. But beyond what I know and don't know lies the unknowable. Yeah. Yeah. So I can never rest with that. There's always more things to discover, And the only safe way to navigate those previously uncharted waters is with love as my compass. So every so often I check and say, am I really in tune with the universe? Am I really paying respect to the universe for the incredible show it puts on? And now wonderful things happening, like quantum physicists that when I was 11 and I passed my 11 plus and went to that school, run by those fools, right? That I remember saying to the physics teacher, now you've got to imagine, like 1962, 63, right? What the, quantum physics, I mean, there are still a lot of, theoretical mathematicians that poo-poo all these. They're all kind of like looking at the same universe, but with different prisms, depending on what their scientific line of inquiry is, So I remember saying, because I was fascinated by the stars and everything, I remember saying to the physics teacher, sir, how can light be the fastest thing in the universe? It's impossible. He thought I was being disruptive, right? Because all the other kids laughed because they didn't fucking understand what I was talking about either, yeah? But I was talking about my observations of the night sky when stars and what my Uncle Chuck had told me about those stars just reflecting light. So in a way, he was already telling me in the 60s that what scientists only sort of like discovered recently and is now like this kind of thing, that basically the universe that we see is a moving hologram. Yeah. Yeah. And it's the space in between that really controls what we see. So at that time in the 60s, the physics teacher would say, space is empty, it's a vacuum, there's nothing there. And I got another beating with a leather strap, so that's impossible. The fact that you can see something to say that it's empty means that there is something there. It has a nature, and that nature and the characteristics of that space must at some point have a connection with the matter and energy that we can see. Because, if you take a graph, the x-axis and the y-axis, and you collapse the space from a 90-degree angle of 45 degrees to 0.1, it will always continue being divisible. That space will always be there, no matter how small. But it can be proven that when you collapse the x, y, and y-axis into each other, there is a point where x and y are a combination. They are the same thing. It's x and y together. But that's also the place where it's made up of space that's completely indivisible. So what appears to be a contradiction in terms is actually the truth, as far as we know it. Yeah? So now, when I said to the physics teacher, light, it's impossible for it to be the fastest thing in the universe, she said, how? I said, because if light was the fastest thing in the universe, there'd be no darkness. Light would be everywhere. So he strapped me 6 times for that, yeah? My mathematics teacher, I thought I was going to a good school where I was going to get all this good information, and instead there was just like all kinds of abuse in every way. This is the way that I was. And I said to the teacher, sir, is the space between 0 and 1 the same as the space between 0 and -1? He said, of course it is. Impossible. How? Well, if the space between 0 and +1 was the same as the space between 0 and -1, that means everything in between what you stipulate is 1, 0, and -1, yeah, has to have the same characteristics. It has to have the same nature. So if they were the same thing, there would only be either 0 + 1 or 0 - 1. Simple.
And then he hit you again.
Then he hit me again. Now, 6 months ago, because I wrote a song in 1978 called Neutron Lover, and the challenge was for me to take these things from space, right, and to use them like in a love song, yeah?
Right.
Called the thing Neutron Lover. A friend of mine, I went round to see him. He had the most incredible fucking library. I could ask him for anything, and he'd say, okay, right? And getting back to I forgot what I was going to say there. What was it? Oh, yeah.
Zeros and ones, beating by a teacher.
No, so yeah, so all these things that were natural to me, like in the 60s when I was a teenager, it was at odds with quantum physics, but now they've discovered the anti-electron.
Maybe you should have been a scientist as opposed to a writer.
Well, I often say that in ancient Greece...
You were just put off education, I think, by being at the wrong school.
Yeah, well, they deliberately separate the brain into left hemisphere and right hemisphere. But in ancient Greece, you couldn't be a philosopher unless you were a mathematician. They are both seen as the same thing, the language to describe the universe. I mean, you could not be a philosopher unless you were a mathematician. Now, because I was put off those things at school, like mathematics and science, it took me a long time to get to a place where I could sort of think, okay. I mean, I've got a friend of mine, he's a scientist, right? I have meetings with him. When I describe that thing about the x-axis and the y-axis collapsing into each other, but still being able to have a space in between, I said, and that, David, is atomic space, because you take that and you rotate it gyroscopically, and the same is true for the whole universe. And he was like, oh my God, that's the biggest discovery since Newton, right? So he went away. I didn't see him for about 9 months. When I saw him again, he had his thick wedge of papers that he'd been writing through, formulas and everything. I said, it doesn't matter about the equations at the moment, David. They'll come up with equations, that they understand. But anyway, I'd always been banging on about space must have, at some point, the same qualities as the matter that it defines, and the energy. So about 6-9 months ago, I was reading scientists have discovered the anti-electron. Now, a vacuum is supposed to be empty, right? There's nothing there. So these anti-electrons borrow energy from nothing. They borrow energy from nothing, right? And they give off a signal which is like a trillionth of a second, right? Yeah. And the price that the anti-electron has to pay to nothing, for giving it life for a moment, is a very speedy return of that energy.
Right.
Yeah. So the anti-electron goes whoosh. It reaches out, is naturally attracted to the nearest electron, and then when they consummate that relationship, that consummation is giving back the energy to nothing. That's fucking incredible. When I read that, I was like, oh my God, these people, these scientists have got to use that. This is the doorways to all the kind of things you read about in sci-fi comics. Yeah?
Like
Right.
wormholes and traveling in between spaces and things.
Exactly. No, when I thought, wow, the anti-electron, that's fucking incredible. So now I said, when people ask me what I do I regard myself as a writer or a painter or a singer or whatever, yeah? Now my inspiration comes from the space between the anti-electron and the electron.
Borrowing energy from nothing.
That same space is also, whatever's going on in that space is going on everywhere and permeates everything. So the space between the anti-electron and the electron holds the secret of life.
And on that bombshell, we'll have to leave it, Bruno, because my computer memory is about to blow up. I should have cleaned my computer out before we started this.
And let's just say that I had a mystical proof of that, where I used to have a lot of lucid dreams, right? I was in this lucid dream with 3 cinema screens in front of me, and one of them said, the secret of life is, and I woke up.
We've all had those dreams.
And then I realized that the secret of life is there is no secret.
Well, perhaps we get the answer when we shuffle this mortal coil. Bruno, the film that's coming out featuring your 4 songs, what's it called? So we can let people know about it.
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to talk about it. I think I can talk about it because it's coming out early next year.
It's called.
It's an adaptation of a short story called How to Talk to Girls at Parties.
That's it. I'm looking at it now. I've just rang it up just so people can know and check it out when it comes out. It's It stars Ellie Fanning, Nicole Kidman. It's got Matt Lucas, of course, the comedian.
Yeah.
And features 4 of your songs. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I've got a cameo part in it because when I met John, the director, he's such a sweet guy, but so intelligent, right? Really intelligent, completely unselfish in the way that he relates to art. Like Hedwig and the Angry Inch was brilliant. People will talk about that in years to come as being like a real groundbreaker. It was only because the general consciousness of the world was so far behind that most that they could accept it as was, well, perhaps that a continuation of, what was that thing in the 60s that everybody, I'll remember later. But no, so, but like meeting John, he's such a nice guy and so talented. And it just all happened naturally, he asked if he could use some of the songs. But then when we started chatting and we had dinner, he said, would you like a cameo part in the film? And I said, yeah, of course. And he said, all the other parts are gone, but perhaps we can have you as a punk barman. I said, John, I've got fucking Parkinson's disease. I'd be the ultimate punk barman. Oh, do you want a double scotch? Boof. It's in your face, But the most important thing for me with all of that was knowing that there were people like John out there that didn't depend on finding me to elevate themselves. They're connected. They're already doing their own great films and art and stuff like that. And that we naturally come together when there's a need for it. It's been really brilliant.
Where can people find your music? Because I searched high and low trying to find some tracks, and it's very difficult to find in some spots.
It's all in one place where you can stream. It's Bandcamp.
Okay.
I'll give you the full address. Or are you familiar with Bandcamp?
I know Bandcamp, yeah, but I'll get the address off you after the show and I'll post it onto the website so when people watch this interview, they can, of course, connect with you and your music through that, basically.
We'll do that. But also, I'll tell you, for anybody that knows how Bandcamp works, you just put the name of the band in lowercase. So mine is the homosexuals.bandcamp.com. So
okay, well, lovely.
You can find everything there.
Well, I think this demands a sequel. I think we'll have to do this again, Bruno. So everyone, thank you so much for listening. Bruno Wizard, you beautiful man. Have you got any more parting thoughts for our listeners before we?
No, there's. Let me just say that when I first went to New York, and people liked me because of my ideas. Ideas were something that in Britain, because I wasn't prepared to sell my soul to the establishment, the establishment used those ideas to beat me with. But when I went to New York, a guy said to me, I was talking to him after I was buying, he said, hey man, that's a really cool idea. You know, let's do something with that. And I actually got some kind of credit and self-affirmation from actually having ideas. So I realized then at that point, my life is my art, is my business, is my life, is my art, is my life. Yeah.
Lovely.
It's on a continuum. So when I'm talking to somebody like you, I can just free will and talk as a scientist or as an idiot savant or an artist or a writer. But first and foremost, never forget, I teach what I need to learn, and words are my best friend. And so I hope there's somebody else there will appreciate those words. And, you know, if they feel like they're in exile in their own heart for whatever reason, then, you know, there's a beautiful universe out there that gave us life and gave us the opportunity to find things only through love. I mean, wouldn't it be horrible if love was something really, really fucking nasty that we had to go through to get enlightenment? The beauty of it is, you know, to actually get to that point, it's by discovering love. Thank you, universe, and thank you for listening.
What a lovely way to end that. You can find, of course, Bruno Wizard's The Heart of Bruno Wizard documentary on Netflix and iTunes. Can the subject of that documentary recommend it?
I'll say yes, but with reservations.
Watch with caution.
Now, let's say that it's a trailer for the real thing. If I'd known what I found out during the film, I wouldn't have done it. The same way that I turned down lots of other offers, you know. But having been through it, I'm not going to kind of like knock it. Let people go. Some people might go and see it and think it's fantastic and get a lot of useful things from it for themselves. So I don't want to involve them really in my own personal experience of how it wasn't what it was supposed to be.
Well, I think one thing it portrays you as is an endlessly fascinating, I was going to say man, but I'd rather call you star child, individual, force of nature, some just ephemerate spiritual being. So yeah, let's do this again, Bruno. I've had a really great time. The Heart of Bruno Wizard is available on iTunes. If you want to connect with Bruno, you can find him on Facebook or at the links below. If you look on the below this YouTube video, you can see where you can find Bruno's music and himself. Yeah, Bruno, what a lovely conversation we've had.
Well, thanks to you, Ethan, as well, because as you know, you got back to me after like some kind of hiatus. So,
well, I know how to do this alone now, so that's why you were the first person I've come to get. Now I can run the ship alone, as it were. So hopefully the universe has brought us back together again, and what a lovely connective interview we've had. So yeah, thank you, sir. Great time.
Thank you, and don't forget, I'm building things, I'm losing things, I'm seeing things, I'm finding things. The child in me is filled with glee. I rub my eyes in mock surprise. Oh, I'm bouncing the ball until it never comes back. It twists and it swerves on its mystical track. That's why I sing. Well, I've been to the desert to see what they could not see. No sky too high nor sea too deep. In the alleyways of our shared dreams, no one to touch us, no one to understand why we would ever hold each other's hands. Soft lights lingering in the breeze. Bye.
And we're out.